Before we begin today's emotional retirement journey, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. If you enjoy retirement stories, life after 50 journeys, inspiring life lessons, emotional family stories, and motivational second chance experiences, you're in the right place. Every week, we bring powerful stories about retirement, resilience, family, hope, and the unexpected adventures that begin after a lifetime of hard work. So please subscribe, turn on notifications, and join our growing community of viewers who believe that life's most meaningful chapter can begin at any age. Now, get comfortable, relax, and let's begin today's touching story. The Last Ride Home. After 42 years of dedicated service as a bank executive, David Harrison thought he was simply going home after retirement. But what happened on that final journey would change his life forever. Let's begin. Red Heart Open Book Headphone. The Retirement Journey. The Last Ride Home. A long emotional retirement story. The conference room was filled with applause. After 42 years of service, David Harrison, the chief operating officer of a major bank, stood quietly beside the podium. A large banner behind him read, "Happy Retirement, David." The room was crowded with executives, managers, tellers, and employees who had worked with him throughout his long career. Everyone smiled. Everyone celebrated. Yet David felt something unusual, a heaviness in his heart. For 4 decades, this building had been his second home. He remembered his first day as a young trainee. He remembered the nervous interviews, the promotions, the challenges, the successes, the late nights, the early mornings, the sacrifices. Now it was ending. His CEO stepped forward. "David, this bank wouldn't be what it is today without your dedication." The room erupted into applause. David smiled politely. But deep inside, he felt tears forming. Not because he was sad, because he was leaving behind an entire lifetime. The farewell ceremony lasted nearly 2 hours. Employees shared stories. Some laughed, some cried. Many spoke about how David had changed their lives. One young manager said, "When my father passed away, Mr. Harrison sat with me for hours. He wasn't just a boss. He was family." Another employee added, "He taught me that success means helping others succeed." David lowered his eyes. He never knew people remembered these moments. As the ceremony ended, something unexpected happened. The employees formed 2 lines. From the conference room all the way to the building entrance. David walked slowly between them. People applauded. Some hugged him. Some shook his hand. Others couldn't stop crying. His closest colleagues walked beside him. As he approached the main entrance, he looked around. The marble floors, the glass walls, the reception desk, the security guards. Everything looked exactly the same, yet somehow completely different. Because tomorrow, he wouldn't be returning. Outside, a black company vehicle waited. The bank had arranged transportation to take him home. But his colleagues had another surprise. Nearly 30 employees stood beside the car. "We're coming with you," one said. David laughed. "What?" "We want to make sure your last ride is special." For a moment, he couldn't speak. The journey home began. Several vehicles followed behind. Like a procession. Like a family escorting one of their own. As they drove through the city, David looked out the window. Every street held memories. There was the coffee shop where he met clients. The small restaurant where he celebrated promotions. The park where he ate lunch during difficult days. 42 years. An entire lifetime. Passing before his eyes. One young employee sat beside him. "Sir, can I ask you something?" David smiled. "Of course. Were you ever scared?" David nodded. "Every day." The young man looked shocked. "You?" David laughed softly. "Confidence isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite fear." The employee wrote the words in his notebook. He knew he would never forget them. As the convoy approached David's neighborhood, memories flooded his mind. He remembered buying his house. He remembered carrying his newborn daughter through the front door. He remembered family dinners, birthday celebrations, Christmas mornings, graduations. Life had moved so quickly. Too quickly. The vehicles finally stopped. David's wife, Margaret, stood outside waiting. She had been married to him for 39 years. She watched the convoy arrive. Her eyes filled with tears. One by one, employees exited their vehicles. The quiet neighborhood suddenly became filled with people. Neighbors peeked through windows, wondering what was happening. David stepped out of the car. His wife hugged him tightly. Neither said a word. Sometimes silence says everything. Then something extraordinary happened. The employees began sharing stories. Each person spoke for a few minutes. Some stories were funny, others emotional. Many revealed acts of kindness David had long forgotten. A young woman said, "When I couldn't afford college, Mr. Harrison secretly paid my tuition assistance." David looked surprised. He barely remembered. For her, it changed everything. Hours passed. The sun slowly began setting. Golden light covered the neighborhood. The gathering became smaller as people started leaving. One by one. Hugs. Handshakes. Goodbyes. Promises to stay in touch. Eventually only a handful remained. Then only one. His closest friend, Michael. Michael had worked beside David for 35 years. They had started almost together. Michael looked at him. "So this is it." David nodded. "So this is it." The two old friends sat quietly on the porch, watching the sunset. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally Michael asked, "What are you going to do tomorrow?" David stared into the distance. For the first time in decades, he had no meetings, no reports, no deadlines, no responsibilities. The answer should have been simple. Yet it wasn't. "I don't know." That night David couldn't sleep. He walked through his house. Every room held memories. The walls displayed photographs from different chapters of life. Young father, middle-aged executive, proud husband, dedicated leader. But now another chapter was beginning. A chapter without a title. Yet, around midnight, he entered the attic, searching through old boxes. Inside one dusty container, he found something unexpected. A notebook. His notebook. From age 22. Before banking. Before promotions. Before responsibility consumed his life. Inside were dreams. Goals. Ideas. Plans. One sentence caught his attention. "One day I want to help young people build successful lives." David sat down, reading the words again. And again. And again. Tears filled his eyes. Somewhere along the journey, he had forgotten that dream. The next morning he woke before sunrise. Old habits. He made coffee, sat on the porch, watched the first light appear. For years, he believed retirement meant the end. But perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps retirement wasn't about stopping. Perhaps it was about returning. Returning to forgotten dreams, forgotten passions, forgotten purposes. Within months, David began mentoring young entrepreneurs, then students, then struggling professionals. His experience became valuable in new ways. People listened. People learned. People grew. And David discovered something beautiful. His greatest contribution wasn't the bank he helped build. It was the people he helped become better. 5 years later, a former student visited him. The young man had become a successful business owner. He handed David a letter. Inside was a simple message. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." David smiled. And at that moment, he realized something profound. His career had ended. But his purpose had not. Because purpose doesn't retire. It simply finds a new home. And sometimes, the most meaningful work of our lives begins after the farewell party is over. The end, Red Heart. Lesson: retirement is not the closing of a door. It is the opening of a new chapter where wisdom becomes legacy and experience becomes a gift to the next generation. Now let's begin. The alarm clock rang at exactly 5:30 a.m. David Harrison opened his eyes slowly. For 42 years, he had woken up at the same time. Rain. Snow, storms, holidays. It didn't matter. The alarm always rang, and David always answered. But today felt different. Very different. For several moments he remained lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet. The house was quiet. Even the world outside seemed quieter than usual. Beside him, his wife Margaret was still sleeping peacefully. David turned his head and looked at her. For a long moment. Almost as if he were seeing her differently. Throughout his career, she had been his greatest supporter. When he worked late nights. When he missed family dinners. When stress followed him home. Margaret had always been there. Patient. Supportive. Loving. And now, after all these years, a new chapter was about to begin. David carefully got out of bed. He didn't want to wake her. Walking into the kitchen, he started the coffee maker. Soon the familiar aroma filled the house. He stood near the window holding his coffee mug. The sunrise was still an hour away. The streets were empty. The neighborhood slept peacefully. And for the first time in decades, David found himself wondering, who am I without my job? The question surprised him. He had spent years looking forward to retirement. Yet now that it had arrived, uncertainty filled his heart. At 6:15 a.m., Margaret entered the kitchen. She smiled. Couldn't sleep? David laughed softly. Not really. She poured herself a cup of coffee, then sat across from him. Neither spoke for several moments. After 39 years of marriage, silence never felt uncomfortable between them. Finally, she reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You'll be okay. David smiled. I know. But secretly, he wasn't completely sure. By 7 a.m., he was dressed. His suit was perfectly pressed. His tie carefully adjusted. His shoes polished. Exactly as they had been thousands of mornings before. Yet this morning was special. This was the final time. The last commute. The last drive. The last day. Before leaving, David paused near the front door. His eyes drifted toward a family photograph hanging on the wall. The picture had been taken 20 years earlier. Their daughter Emily was smiling. Their son Matthew stood proudly beside her. Margaret looked beautiful. And David looked younger. Stronger. Full of ambition. Time had moved quickly. Too quickly. Margaret noticed him staring. What are you thinking? David smiled sadly. I'm wondering where all the years went. She walked over and wrapped her arms around him. Into building a wonderful life. For a moment, David couldn't speak. Then he nodded. She was right. The years hadn't disappeared. They had become memories. A family. A life. The drive to the bank felt strangely emotional. Every street held memories. The gas station where he stopped every Monday. The diner where he met clients. The traffic light where he always seemed to get stuck. The city looked exactly the same. Yet everything felt different. Because today was the last time he would make this journey as an employee. When he arrived at the bank headquarters, something unexpected happened. Employees were already waiting outside. Dozens of them. Some held signs. Others held flowers. Several younger employees were recording videos on their phones. As David stepped out of his car, applause erupted. The sound echoed through the parking lot. David froze. He hadn't expected this. Not at all. A young teller stepped forward. Good morning, Mr. Harrison. David smiled. Good morning. The young woman handed him a small gift box. Thank you for everything you've done for us. David accepted it carefully. His throat tightened. The day had barely begun, and already emotions were overwhelming him. Inside the building, the atmosphere felt different. Employees greeted him at every turn. People stopped working just to shake his hand. Some wanted photographs. Others wanted one last conversation. One by one they approached, and one by one they shared stories. Stories David had forgotten. Moments he barely remembered. Yet moments that had changed someone else's life. A promotion. An encouraging conversation. A second chance. A kind word during difficult times. David listened carefully, and slowly realized something important. His greatest achievement wasn't the profits, or the promotions, or the awards. It was the people. Always the people. At exactly 9 a.m., David entered his office. The office he had occupied for nearly 15 years. He closed the door behind him. And for the first time all morning, he was completely alone. The room felt strangely quiet. The large desk. The leather chair. The framed certificates. The awards lining the shelves. Everything looked familiar, yet somehow distant, as if it already belonged to someone else. David sat down, opened the top drawer, and removed a small notebook. The notebook contained every major goal he had ever written throughout his career. The first entry was dated 42 years earlier. A young man with big dreams. A young man who wanted to succeed. A young man determined to build a better future. David smiled as he read the old pages. Then he slowly closed the notebook. His journey here was complete. But little did David know. The farewell celebration waiting for him later that day would become one of the most unforgettable moments of his entire life. And before the sun set, a surprise from his colleagues would change the way he viewed retirement forever. End of Part 1. Next, Part 2, the farewell ceremony, much more emotional and dramatic, Red Heart Open Book. The clock on David Harrison's office wall showed 10:15 a.m. The morning had passed quickly. Too quickly. Every few minutes someone knocked on his door. Some came with gifts. Others came with cards. Many simply wanted to say thank you. David welcomed each visitor warmly. He knew these moments would never come again. This was his final day. His final morning. His final chapter inside the bank that had defined most of his adult life. Around 11 a.m., David noticed something unusual. Employees seemed nervous. People whispered in hallways. Managers disappeared into meeting rooms. Whenever he asked what was happening, everyone smiled mysteriously. "We'll see you at noon, sir." Nothing more. Nothing less. The secrecy made him curious, but he decided not to ask again. At 11:45 a.m., David received a message. "Please come to Conference Hall A at noon." That was all. No explanation. No details. Just a simple request. David straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and left his office. As he walked through the hallways, employees smiled at him. Many looked emotional. Some looked like they were trying not to cry. David's heart began beating faster. Something special was happening. He could feel it. When he reached the conference hall doors, he stopped. The doors were closed. Two young employees stood beside them. Both smiled. "Ready, Mr. Harrison?" David laughed nervously. "I guess so." The doors slowly opened, and David froze. The entire room erupted with applause. More than 200 employees stood together, clapping, smiling, cheering. A giant banner stretched across the wall. "Thank you for 42 years of leadership." Photographs covered every surface. Pictures from decades of service. Young David in his first suit. David receiving promotions. David celebrating company milestones. David laughing with employees. David mentoring young staff. An entire lifetime displayed before him. For several seconds, he couldn't move. He simply stared, overwhelmed, speechless. Then he noticed something else. Near the front row sat people he hadn't seen in years. Former employees, retired colleagues, old friends. Some had traveled hundreds of miles to be there. David felt tears forming immediately. He hadn't expected this. Not even close. The CEO approached him. "Come on, David." The CEO placed a hand on his shoulder. "This day belongs to you." The room applauded again. David slowly walked toward the stage. Each step felt heavier than the last. Not because he was tired, because he was emotional. When he reached the podium, the applause continued, and continued, and continued. Nearly 2 minutes passed before the room became quiet. David looked across the audience. So many faces. So many memories. So many lives connected through years of shared experiences. His voice almost failed him. But finally he managed to speak. "Thank you." Only 2 words. Yet they carried decades of gratitude. The ceremony began. The first speaker was the CEO. He spoke about David's achievements, the growth of the bank, the challenges they had overcome together, the countless decisions that helped shape the organization. But then his speech changed direction and became personal. Very personal. The CEO looked directly at David. "You taught us something more important than banking." The room became silent. "You taught us how to treat people." David lowered his eyes. The CEO continued. "When employees faced hardships, you listened. When families experienced tragedy, you cared. When young professionals needed guidance, you gave your time. You never forgot that business is built by people." The audience erupted into applause. David felt his chest tighten, because those moments had always seemed small to him. Yet apparently they meant everything to others. Next came department managers, one after another, each sharing memories, each telling stories, each revealing moments David had completely forgotten. A manager named Susan stepped forward. She smiled through tears. "I was 23 years old when I started here." The audience listened carefully. "I made a terrible mistake during my first month." Several people laughed knowingly. Susan continued. "I thought my career was over." David remembered the incident immediately. The young employee had been devastated, terrified, certain she would lose her job. Susan smiled at him. "Instead of firing me, Mr. Harrison sat beside me for 2 hours." David remembered. She had cried throughout the conversation. "I learned more from that mistake than from any success." The room applauded. Susan wiped tears from her eyes. "And today, I'm a senior manager because someone believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." David felt tears sliding down his cheeks. He didn't bother hiding them. More speakers followed. The stories continued. A young teller spoke about losing her father. A branch manager described a difficult divorce. Another employee talked about battling illness. Again and again, the same message appeared. David had shown up. He had listened. He had cared. He had helped. By now many people in the room were crying, including David. The farewell had become something much bigger than retirement. It had become a celebration of human connection, a celebration of kindness, a celebration of a life spent helping others. Then something unexpected happened. The lights dimmed. A large screen descended from the ceiling. David looked confused. The CEO smiled. "We have one more surprise." The screen flickered to life, and suddenly old video clips appeared. David from decades ago. David at company picnics. David giving speeches. David laughing. David mentoring young employees. David celebrating victories. David comforting people during difficult moments. 42 years condensed into a single video. As the video played, the room remained completely silent. Only soft music filled the air. David watched memories flash before him. Years disappeared in seconds. Children grew up. Careers evolved. Friendships deepened. Life moved forward. The video ended with a simple message, displayed across the screen. Your legacy is not what you built. It's who you helped become better. The room stood immediately. A standing ovation. Everyone applauded. Everyone. No exceptions. David covered his face. The emotions were overwhelming. For the first time all day, he completely lost control. And no one judged him. Because many others were crying too. But the most emotional moment of the entire day was still waiting. A surprise visitor was about to walk through the conference room doors. The applause echoed through the conference hall. Many employees were wiping away tears. David Harrison stood quietly beside the podium, overwhelmed by emotion. He believed the ceremony was nearly over. After all, what more could possibly happen? The speeches had been beautiful. The video tribute had touched his heart. The room was filled with love and respect. Surely that was the final surprise. He was wrong. Very wrong. As the applause slowly faded, the CEO stepped back to the microphone. A smile appeared on his face. A mysterious smile. The kind that suggested one final secret remained. The audience noticed it immediately. The room became quiet. David looked confused. "What now?" he asked jokingly. Several people laughed. The CEO smiled. "David, throughout your career you've helped thousands of people." David nodded politely. The CEO continued. "Some worked directly with you. Some worked under your leadership. And some only crossed your path for a short time." The room listened carefully. No one knew where this was going. The CEO looked toward the conference room entrance. Then he said quietly, "But one person traveled a very long distance to see you today." David frowned. He couldn't imagine who it might be. Most of his close friends were already present. Most former colleagues had either retired or moved away years ago. Who could it be? The conference room doors slowly opened. Everyone turned. Every eye focused on the entrance. A young man stepped inside. Perhaps 35 years old. Well-dressed. Confident. Successful. Yet his face showed deep emotion. The young man paused, looking across the room. Looking directly at David. For several moments neither spoke. David stared, trying to recognize him. Searching his memory. The face seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. Then the young man smiled. And suddenly David's eyes widened. His mouth fell open. His hands began trembling. "No!" The word escaped his lips, almost as a whisper. The young man nodded, and smiled again. "Hello, Mr. Harrison." David took a step forward. Then another. Tears instantly filled his eyes. Because finally he remembered. 22 years earlier, a frightened teenager had entered the bank. Not as an employee, not as a customer, but as a desperate son. His mother had recently passed away. His father was seriously ill. The family was facing financial disaster. The teenager had come seeking help, seeking answers, seeking hope. And on that difficult day, David had been the person who sat down and listened. The young man standing before him now was that teenager. His name was Ethan Carter. And David had not seen him in over 2 decades. The room remained silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone sensed something important was unfolding. Ethan slowly walked toward the stage. His voice trembled. "You probably don't remember everything." David shook his head. "No, Ethan. I remember." And he did. Every detail. He remembered the fear in Ethan's eyes. The uncertainty. The pain. The hopelessness. He remembered staying late after work, helping the family understand financial options, connecting them with resources, guiding them through one of the darkest periods of their lives. At the time, David viewed it as a small act of kindness. Nothing extraordinary. Just helping someone who needed help. Then life moved on. Years passed. And eventually he forgot. But Ethan never forgot. Ethan reached the stage. He looked directly at David, then toward the audience, and finally began speaking. 22 years ago, my life was falling apart." The room listened carefully. "My mother had died. My father was sick. We were losing our home. I was terrified." His voice cracked. Several people in the audience wiped away tears. "I walked into this bank, because I didn't know where else to go." He looked at David. "And this man stayed with me until nearly 9 o'clock that night." David lowered his eyes. The memory returned clearly now. Ethan continued, "He wasn't required to help me. He could have gone home. He could have said he was too busy. But he didn't. He listened. He guided me. And most importantly," Ethan paused, trying to control his emotions, "he made me believe that my future wasn't over." The room became completely silent. Not even a whisper. Ethan smiled through tears. "You changed my life." David covered his mouth, trying unsuccessfully to hold back emotion. Then Ethan revealed something nobody expected. Not even David. "Today I'm the founder of 3 successful companies." The audience gasped. "I'm married. I have 2 beautiful children. And every opportunity I've had began with a conversation inside this building." The room erupted into applause. Yet Ethan wasn't finished. He reached into his jacket pocket, carefully removing an old piece of paper, yellowed by age, worn by time, protected for over 20 years. Ethan held it up. "This is the note Mr. Harrison gave me that night." David's eyes widened. He remembered writing it. The note contained a simple sentence. "Difficult chapters are not the end of your story. Keep moving forward." Ethan smiled. "I carried this paper for 22 years. Gasps filled the room. Several employees openly cried. The CEO lowered his head emotionally. Ethan looked toward David again. "Whenever life became difficult, I read those words. When my business nearly failed, I read those words. When I doubted myself, I read those words. When success seemed impossible, I read those words." Then he stepped closer, very close, and said something David would remember forever. "My children know your name. My wife knows your name. My employees know your name. Because every good thing in my life began with your kindness." At that moment, David could no longer hold back tears. Neither could Ethan. The 2 men embraced, and the room exploded with applause. The loudest applause of the entire day. Many people later said it was the most emotional moment they had ever witnessed. Not because of money. Not because of success. Not because of business. But because one act of kindness had changed an entire life. And that life had gone on to impact countless others. As the applause continued, David realized something powerful. The awards on his office walls would eventually be forgotten. The titles would disappear. The promotions would fade. Even his career would become history. But kindness? Kindness lives forever. Through generations. Through families. Through people whose lives are changed forever. David thought the surprises were finally over. Surely nothing could top this moment. Surely the day had reached its emotional peak. But he was wrong. Because after the ceremony ended, his colleagues had one final farewell planned. And that farewell would become known as the last ride home. Yendi. Part 4. The last walk through the BNK, the last ride home. For several minutes after Ethan's speech, the conference hall remained filled with emotion. Employees stood silently. Some cried openly. Others hugged one another. No one wanted the moment to end. David himself felt as though he had stepped outside of time. 42 years. 42 years of work. Meetings. Deadlines. Pressure. Responsibilities. And yet, in the end, the thing that mattered most wasn't a financial report. It wasn't a promotion. It wasn't an award. It was a single life he had helped many years ago. A life that had gone on to touch countless others. Eventually the applause faded. The audience slowly returned to their seats. The CEO stepped forward one final time. He smiled warmly. "David, thank you." The room nodded in agreement. Everyone felt the same. Thank you. 2 simple words. Yet somehow not enough. Never enough. Not for 42 years. The ceremony officially ended. People lined up to speak with David. One after another. The line seemed endless. Young employees. Senior managers. Former coworkers. Retirees. friends, mentors, students. Everyone wanted one final conversation, one final memory, one final handshake, one final goodbye. Hours passed. The conference hall gradually emptied. The decorations remained. The flowers remained. The photographs remained. But the crowd slowly disappeared, until finally only a handful of people remained. David looked around. The room felt strangely quiet, almost lonely. Just a few hours earlier it had been filled with energy. Now silence filled the air. His assistant of 15 years approached. Her name was Karen. She had worked beside David through countless challenges. Good years. Bad years. Economic crisis. Company expansions. Everything. Karen handed him a small envelope. "Open it later," she said softly. David smiled. "Thank you, Karen." She nodded, then unexpectedly hugged him. Tightly. When she stepped back, tears filled her eyes. Neither said much. They didn't need to. Some relationships go beyond words. As Karen walked away, David suddenly realized something. The day was ending. The farewell ceremony was over. The speeches were finished. The photographs had been taken. The celebration was complete. Now came the hardest part. Leaving. For 42 years, he had entered this building. Every morning. Without fail. Now he had to walk out. For the last time. The thought hit him harder than expected. His chest tightened. His heart felt heavy. Because leaving wasn't just leaving a building. It was leaving an entire chapter of life. The CEO appeared beside him. "You ready?" David looked around, then shook his head. The CEO laughed gently. "Neither was I when I retired from my first company." David smiled. "You retired once before?" The CEO nodded. "And I learned something important." "What?" "The hardest goodbye is always the first step." David took a deep breath, then nodded. "Let's do it." Together they left the conference hall, walking slowly through the main corridor. Employees immediately noticed. Word spread quickly. David was leaving. People emerged from offices, meeting rooms, break rooms, workstations. Everywhere. Soon dozens of employees filled the hallway, watching quietly, respectfully, emotionally. David walked slowly, very slowly, almost as if he were trying to memorize every detail. The walls, the artwork, the lighting, the sounds, the atmosphere, everything. He passed apartments where he had spent years solving problems. He passed offices where important decisions had been made. He passed conference rooms filled with memories. Some happy, some difficult, some unforgettable. At one point, he stopped beside a large window overlooking the city. The same window where he often stood during stressful days. Looking for clarity. Looking for perspective. Looking for answers. The city looked beautiful. Afternoon sunlight reflected off distant buildings. Cars moved along busy streets. Life continued, as it always would, with or without him. For a moment David felt small, not insignificant, just human. A reminder that no matter how important we think we are, the world keeps moving. And that's okay. As they continued walking, employees quietly joined behind him. Then more joined, and more, and more. Soon nearly 100 people followed, not speaking, simply walking, together. The atmosphere felt almost sacred. No one checked phones. No one rushed. No one talked loudly. Everyone understood. This was a moment that would never happen again. David eventually reached his office. The office he had occupied for 15 years. He paused at the doorway, looking inside. One last time. The room was empty now. The personal items had been packed. The books removed. The family photographs boxed. The desk cleared. Only memories remained. Slowly he entered, walking toward the large window. He stood there quietly, looking out over the city. Thousands of mornings. Thousands of decisions. Thousands of conversations. All from this room. He remembered his first day here. How nervous he had been. How proud he had felt. How determined he was to succeed. Now the room belonged to the future. Someone else would sit here. Someone else would make decisions. Someone else would continue the work. And that was exactly how it should be. David reached into his pocket, removing the office key. A simple object. Small, ordinary, yet somehow incredibly meaningful. He stared at it for several moments, then placed it gently on the desk. The sound echoed through the quiet office. A tiny sound, yet it felt enormous. His final act as an employee. The chapter was officially over. When David stepped back into the hallway, the crowd was even larger. Nearly every available employee had gathered, waiting, watching, respecting the moment. Then something extraordinary happened. The employees formed two lines, one on each side of the hallway, creating a path from David's office all the way to the main entrance. Hundreds of feet long. A corridor of gratitude. A corridor of respect. A corridor of love. David looked ahead. The pathway stretched before him, filled with faces. Faces from every stage of his career. Faces connected to countless memories. And standing at the very end of that pathway, near the main entrance, was a surprise that would leave him completely speechless. A farewell no one had told him about. A farewell planned in secret for months. David took his first step forward. The final walk had begun. End of Part 4. Next, Part 5, The Hallway of Honor, the emotional goodbye tea. Senior executives, security guards, janitors, receptionists, managers, interns, people from every department, every level, every corner of the bank, all gathered for one reason: him. The silence was almost overwhelming. No one spoke. No one moved. Everyone simply waited. Waiting for David to take that first step. The first step of his final walk. David looked down the hallway, then slowly turned toward the CEO. "What is this?" His voice was barely above a whisper. The CEO smiled. "This is your hallway of honor." David felt tears immediately filling his eyes. Months earlier, employees had secretly planned this farewell. Not because the company requested it. Not because management instructed it. But because they wanted to. Because they felt they owed him something. A final thank you. A final gesture. A final expression of gratitude. David looked around. Many employees were already crying. Others struggled to hold back emotion. The atmosphere felt more like a family gathering than a corporate office. And perhaps that was exactly what it was. For 42 years, David had treated people like family. Now family was saying goodbye. Finally, he took a deep breath and stepped forward. Immediately, the applause began. Soft at first, gentle, respectful, then louder, stronger, more emotional. Soon the entire hallway echoed with applause. David walked slowly, very slowly, trying to absorb every second, every face, every memory, every emotion. As he passed the first group of employees, many reached out to shake his hand. Some hugged him. Others simply nodded, unable to speak through tears. A young woman stepped forward. She could not have been older than 25. Her eyes were red from crying. "Mr. Harrison?" David stopped. "Yes." She smiled nervously. "You probably don't remember me." David smiled. "I remember more people than you think." She laughed through tears. "When I started here, I was terrified. David nodded. Many young employees felt that way. She continued. You told me something during my first week. What was that? She smiled. You said, never be afraid to ask questions. That's how people grow. David remembered. A simple conversation. A simple sentence. A simple moment. Yet apparently it had stayed with her for years. Before moving on, she hugged him tightly. Thank you. Only 2 words. Yet somehow they carried enormous weight. David continued walking. The applause never stopped. Several steps later, he saw an elderly security guard. George. George had worked at the bank for nearly 30 years. The 2 men had known each other forever. George stood proudly in uniform, trying desperately not to cry, failing completely. David laughed softly. So you're crying too? George laughed through tears. Don't make this harder than it already is. The 2 old friends embraced, neither caring who watched, neither caring about titles, or positions, or appearances. Just 2 men saying goodbye. As David moved farther down the hallway, memories flooded his mind. Every department triggered another story. Every face unlocked another chapter. He remembered difficult economic years. Times when layoffs seemed unavoidable. Times when fear filled the organization. Yet somehow, they had survived together. He remembered celebrating record-breaking success. Major accomplishments. New branches. Growth. Opportunity. He remembered weddings. Retirements. Births. Promotions. Losses. Funerals. Recoveries. Life. All of life. Because when you spend 42 years somewhere, you don't just build a career. You build relationships. You build history. You build a family. Halfway down the corridor, David noticed something unusual. Small framed photographs lined the walls. Photographs that had not been there earlier. He moved closer and immediately understood. Each picture showed a different moment from his career. His first employee badge. His first promotion. His first management team. Company celebrations. Community service projects. Charity events. Holiday gatherings. The photographs formed a timeline. A visual story of 42 years. David stopped repeatedly, studying each image, remembering moments long forgotten. One photograph showed him holding his daughter as a baby during a company family event. Another showed him helping build homes for a community charity project. Another showed dozens of employees laughing during a summer picnic. Each image reminded him of something important. Success was never about numbers. Success was about people. Always people. As David continued walking, something unexpected happened. The applause suddenly stopped. The silence was immediate, complete, almost shocking. Confused, David looked ahead. Why had everyone stopped clapping? Then he saw it, and his breath caught. Near the main entrance stood a giant display board, nearly 10 feet wide, covered entirely with handwritten messages. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Messages from employees, past and present. People whose lives he had touched over 4 decades. David slowly approached, reading one message after another. Thank you for believing in me. You changed my career. You helped me through the hardest year of my life. You taught me leadership. You taught me kindness. You taught me confidence. You taught me courage. Soon the words became difficult to read, because tears blurred his vision. He wiped his eyes repeatedly, but more tears followed. The board contained messages from people he barely remembered, yet they remembered him. And that realization hit harder than anything else. Many of the most important things we do in life, we never fully see. We never fully understand. We never fully measure. A kind conversation. A moment of patience. A word of encouragement. A second chance. Years later, those moments can still change lives. David finally reached the end of the hallway of honor. Only a few steps remained between him and the front entrance. Outside, sunlight filled the glass lobby. The parking area was visible beyond the doors. Several vehicles waited, but something about them seemed unusual. David couldn't quite see clearly from where he stood. The CEO approached him again, smiling, almost laughing now. "You thought the surprises were finished?" David shook his head slowly. "No." The CEO grinned. "They're just getting started." David looked outside once more, and suddenly realized something extraordinary was waiting beyond those doors. Something his colleagues had been planning for months. Something that would turn his final trip home into a journey he would never forget for the rest of his life. His heart pounded. Something extraordinary was waiting beyond those glass doors. Something his colleagues had planned in complete secrecy. Something that would transform an ordinary retirement farewell into a memory that would last forever. But David had no idea what was about to happen next. And when he finally stepped outside, the sight waiting for him would bring tears to his eyes. Was this truly goodbye? Or was this the beginning of an entirely new journey? We'll find out in the next chapter of The Last Ride Home. Until then, remember, retirement is not the end of life. Sometimes, the most beautiful chapters begin after the final day of work. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe, like, and share with someone who believes it's never too late for a new beginning. And join us for part 6, where David discovers the incredible surprise waiting outside the bank. To be continued. Red Heart Open Book Automobile. Short version. What David sees outside the bank will change everything. A surprise planned for months is finally about to be revealed. Will his final ride home become the most unforgettable day of his life? Find out in the next part. To be continued. Red Heart.